Recording.
Okay. Hi everyone, this is Justin here again. We are finishing up our study of reform or revolution that we've been doing over the past couple weeks. Really excited to start with this. Nick, do you got anything you want to say?
No.
Or
I'm
anyone
just
else?
excited to wrap it up.
Okay, cool. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started then. Same as usual, just we'll do a summary. We'll go over the quotes we picked out and go from there. Well, there we go. Okay. So yeah, chapter 8 was the big one. That took up the bulk of this. So Luxemburg in this chapter addresses the issue of whether or not the bourgeois democratic form of democracy renders a revolution unnecessary. So in other words, what she's trying to get at is answering the question like, can socialists come to power through purely legal parliamentary reforms and methods, right? And so Rosa makes the case that while she doesn't say parliamentarism is bad, like in itself, de facto, like it's just, an unacceptable thing. She does make the point that the working class will never actually seize power purely in that fashion, right? So she said so Luxemburg highlights the dialectical relationship between reform and revolution. She says that they simultaneously complement each other while also being at odds with one another. And basically her point, we got some quotes about that, right? But she argues that advocating for reforms can be part of a revolutionary agenda, but that reformists view it as like the end unto itself. Like for the reformists, that is their whole argument, is they just want to make things gentler and kindler. They don't actually want to seize power. So that's what makes reform it's ineffective, is that they want to make capitalism just more tolerable and humane capitalism, so to say, rather than the goal of putting the working class in charge.
They just want to improve society
Oh yeah.
somewhat.
Oh yeah, I just want to improve society somewhat. Yeah, exactly. That's the idea there. And we'll get more into that one. But Luxemburg also makes the point that what makes capitalism unique compared to other modes of production in historical epochs is that it's economic relationships rather than legal relationships. In capitalism, those economic relationships of worker and owner are the primary means of enforcing the bourgeois dictatorship. So she talks about how, under feudalism, the serfs had to pay tribute to the king because that was the divine law. They had the divine right of kings. Under capitalism, we do treat CEOs and stuff as gods and stuff in many respects, but ultimately, that's not why people clock into work every day. They clock into work every day because capitalism is set up so that if you cannot sell your labor power as a commodity, then you can't access food, shelter, and medicine, and you starve, you die. We'll talk more about that one too. And then she also argues that like bourgeois democracy doesn't render a revolution irrelevant. Doesn't make it like an old-fashioned sort of thing. Rather, it makes it necessary and unavoidable. And she argues this point because liberal democracy has within it the shell of a proletarian democracy, and also because people gain a consciousness through struggles, right? And that can include a struggle for, I don't know, raise the minimum wage to $15. People can learn by advocating for that. They can get practice as organizers, and they can gain more consciousness. So she, Bernstein, I guess, talked about like, oh well, it's not the right time for revolution. It's too premature. We have to let capitalism develop a little bit more. She argues that's all nonsense, right? Because a revolution's always going to seem like it's premature until it actually happens. So like, why would you hold yourself back? Before we go to the quotes, does anyone want to comment on that or add to it, or maybe you disagree with it? Okay, I don't hear any comments or anything. Okay, so this is the first quote we picked out, right, from chapter 8. on page 516, if you have the paper book, it says legislative reform, I should say, and revolution are not different methods of historical development that can be picked out at the pleasure from the counter of history, just as one chooses hot or cold sausages. Legislative reform and revolution are different factors in the development of a class society. They condition and complement each other and are at the same time reciprocally exclusive, as are the North and South poles, the bourgeoisie and proletariat. Every legal constitution is the product of a revolution. In the history of classes, revolution is the political act of political creation, while legislation is the political expression of the life of a society that has already come into being, right? And Nick, I think you shared that quote. Um, so the questions I had for this were, what specific ways, like how specifically do reform and revolution complement each other, and then how do they condition each other as well?
Um, reform can be like a prelude to a revolution by changing and making like conditions maybe uh reforms should be like a prelude to a revolution.
Mm-hmm. Is anyone else?
Just to piggyback off that, I think Luxemburg talked about that briefly about the from feudal times to the bourgeois revolution that we've seen is like their reforms historically use legislation to like strengthen their position of power, and I think that's something that we should see and work towards with any movement in the legislation field.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's also a good point. Does anyone else
And
have anything to say about
legislation
that?
can uh, reform can make it easier for people to organize and not be criminalized for it.
Yes, that is a big one. I think she actually talks about that elsewhere in the same chapter, where she talks about how, like, yeah, like bourgeois democracy isn't all that great, but like it's easier to, or like Danny said, it's easier to organize workers into industrial unions if the state isn't gonna come and arrest you for talking about unions at work, right?
Yeah,
Um, yes, that's a very important point.
I think really modern example right now is the PROS Act, or I believe that's what it's called. I mean, we can. It doesn't really matter, but it's the act that the DSA has been trying to push and campaign for unionization in the workplace and making it easier to talk about unions in the workplace and not criminalize it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's good because the more people that are in unions, the more conscious people are, right? Um,
Yeah,
I think another way myself in that they can complement each other is that so you can't just like force people and force the masses to be like, yeah, we're just gonna go straight to I don't know, the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 tomorrow. Like, go grab your guns, like let's go. Like it doesn't work that way, right? Like people just aren't there yet. And how do they get to that point is they kind of have to see that trying to reform the system is not going to work. So I think communists can struggle alongside workers who maybe we as communists know, like, okay, like increasing the minimum wage isn't going to solve everything, but that helps people realize it, and you're struggling alongside them, and instead of like telling them, no, you need to think this way, like, okay, we'll test this out, and did you see how that not worked? Like, how is that working out for you? Does that make sense? Like, getting people to learn on their own. Is how I see it. But then, in what ways are they, so they being reform and revolution, so in what ways are they reciprocally exclusive?
Reciprocally exclusive as in like the differences, or
Like mutually exclusive, yeah, think of it like the differences and not just the differences, but like how are those differences at odds with one another?
um well, I think reform advocates that we try and change the existing economic order of society, whereas revolution would be a more radical, complete change of the economic, how it is that the economic um, system works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's definitely a good point. Because yeah, if you're trying to undermine the society, why would you try and improve it? Anyone else?
I had to step away for a second, so this might not entirely answer the question.
Mm-hmm.
But I think part of the differences between reform and revolution as a way to achieve socialism or like really make progress is like, imagine for a second if Bernie Sanders had been elected president and that he was like super based and tried to push forth a law that would severely limit the rights of people who own private property, like really clamp down on private property, super high wealth tax, really limit the ways in which they can exploit workers. I can't imagine that act passing Congress, first of all. And even if it did, the enormous capital strike that would ensue would mean that even if a good law had been passed, the enforcement structures don't exist in this country right now to actually make sure that the law did what it was supposed to do. And so, like, that would be attempting the abolition of private property is such an enormous change in the way we do things that incremental methods are going to get people who still have the real material power mad at you and uncooperative without any recourse for you as a reformer to deal with them.
Yes, that is a very good point, John. Because I had an idea that gets so I was thinking about what if I ran for like Riley County Sheriff, like elected position, and I ran on a platform of as sheriff, I'm going to refuse to do evictions, and furthermore, I'm going to arrest any landlords who try to evict their tenants, right? And I actually spoke to another communist comrade who's an attorney, and I was like, "Hey, you're an attorney. Like, what would realistically happen legally if I did this?" And is like you said, John. He's like, "Yeah, you might get popularly elected that way, but no judge is going to certify you. They're going to rule. They're going to discard you as a candidate because you violate the constitutional right of property." So it's like, yeah, like even if you win a reform in one aspect, because the system fundamentally remains the same, nothing actually changes, and in fact, the rest of the system will work against you. Right? That's a very good point. Anyone else?
not me personally.
Okay. I think those are some good reasons. We'll go to the next one. All right, this is another one from Chapter 8 on page 518, right? It says, what distinguishes bourgeois society from other classes, from ancient... Oh, hello, Madi. What distinguishes a bourgeois society from other classes, from ancient society and from the social order of the Middle Ages? Precisely the fact that economic domination does not rest on quote-unquote acquired rights, but on real economic relations. The fact that wage labor is not a juridical relationship. Juridical means like a formal legal relationship.
Juridical?
Is it pronounced that way? I always pronounced it juridical.
I think it's juridical.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's spelled juridical in the book, but I think that's just a typo. It's juridical.
Oh, okay. Well, learn something new every day. Okay, so wage labor is not a juridical relationship, but purely an economic one. In our juridical system, there is not a single legal formula for the class domination of today. The few remaining traces of such formulae of class dominion are, as that concerning servants, survivals of feudal society, right? So, is this necessarily true in modern United States of America, right? So, in other words, what might Luxemburg think about our prison industrial complex?
I think that some of these acquired rights still exist, but not in the same way as a right of a person to something, but but as a right of a corporation.
Mm-hmm.
Like there are still uh, like legal monopoly rights granted. For example, for pharmaceutical companies. And I was reading about this the other week that one of the developers of a COVID-19 medicine also received a legal monopoly right because the reason that they give this right is so that they give it when it's a medicine that is not going to be used by enough people, so it's not going to be cost effective to manufacture and develop when there's too much competition. So they eliminate competition and let the companies do whatever they want.
Mm-hmm.
But then, as it turns out, COVID-19 isn't a rare disease. So they've been making some real good money.
I want to make a comment about the prison industrial complex and like about law. I'm pretty sure that like one of the amendments, like the amendment that abolishes slavery, says that slavery was abolished only like, but not in the case, like if you're a prisoner. So if you're a prisoner, then you can be, I mean, legally a slave, and so I mean so I guess I mean it's more a lot more prevalent, even though I'm pretty sure that like slave like labor is definitely employed in the modern day, like in Georgia, where there were like Mexican like immigrants that came over the border, and then they were like given less, like way less than minimum wage for like southern Georgia, I think. That was at some time. And so I mean, like maybe if a law says that it's okay, then it'll be more prevalent, but that probably doesn't stop all of the all forms of like slave labor. And also what do you think about that?
Oh no, yeah, that's the 13th Amendment, by the way, and you're absolutely right. It does say that slavery is outlawed except as punishment for a crime. So that's just, in case you want to look it up, that's the 13th Amendment of the Constitution. Now, Luxemburg would have definitely known about that, but what I was thinking about, Pedamilo, what you said about like immigrant labor specifically, I was thinking kind of like migrant farm workers and other kinds of low-paid migrant workers are it's almost like they're governed by another legal system, because if you're an immigrant and you come to this country and let's say you're on a visa or something and it expires or whatever, not only are you subject to the regular criminal justice system that all of us are, but you're also subject to ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement. You're subject to like the Border Patrol and all that. So and Luxemburg couldn't have really foreseen that, so I don't want to like knock her on that, because this thing developed century or so after, she wrote this book. But it's like, yeah, it's kind of like you're saying, having that hanging sword over your head of like being under the threat of not just regular cops, but also after worrying about immigration status. that kind of has a chilling effect on like workers' abilities to organize, and I would argue that's very much a juridical relationship, because it's literally the law, right?
Yeah.
That's what I had in mind when I wrote this question.
And also about the second one, what is the point of law under bourgeois society
Yes.
if the law is no longer the primary force driving economic domination? I mean, the point of law, I think that it's to, what is it that you think that the point of law is?
I want to see what other people think before I say what I think.
All right. Well, I mean, I want to say something like, I mean, I could describe it, but I don't know if it is that it would.
Anyone else want to take a shot?
May I try?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that the point of law is that it maintains an order in which bourgeois society can express itself and exploit people. Maintains the social order that is necessary for production and exploitation.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree with that.
So
Anyone else?
law, like she says in the book, I don't have the quote where it is on hand, but law is how an already created society legitimizes itself.
Mm-hmm.
So the point of law, yes, it is to continue the economic domination, but it is to give it an air of legitimacy. So law itself is not necessarily reinforcing it materially, the class domination, but ideologically. And so, I mean, that's the point of, because like she says, legislation is how a already created society rules itself and it presents itself, but whereas revolution is the creation of a new society. So law is ideologically legitimizing itself and not necessarily any like materially reinforcing the class domination.
I agree with that too. That's also a really good point. Okay, so I was thinking, I agree with what Sam said. Like, that's absolutely true. The law is like an ideological justification for society. I was thinking of it more in terms personally when I wrote this, like what Danny said. In this example I was thinking of is, let's take, for example, something like the FDA, right? And sometimes capitalists might want to design a product or something that's going to harm a lot of people. And the FDA will come in and be like, look, you can't market this. Not because they care about the health and welfare of the working class of the United States, but because if they're like, yeah, this product you want to market might be individually profitable to your individual firm, and you'll make an immense profit, but in terms of the stability of the overall capitalist system, like, we can't allow you to market this poison because it would, kill too much of the labor force, and that would cause an underemployment crisis or whatever, right? So that's kind of how I was thinking about it, is like the state and the law comes in to mediate capitalist relationships in the interest of stability of the system. But what Sam said is also 100% true, I think. So, Petamilo, did that kind of jive with what you were thinking or what you wanted to say?
Well, what it is, I was going to say, is that laws are essentially for people in, like, the class that is, like, the exploited class. I want to say something like laws are predominantly there, or, I mean, maybe not all, but something like the laws are predominantly only for the exploited class of people within society, and to keep, I mean, and to make people think that, I mean, something on the lines of even like reform and revolution both are something that isn't should something like they're not good for society or something.
So you're saying they use the law to like crack down on revolutionaries? Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, that's definitely something that the law could be used for, but in general it applies mostly only to the exploited people, so the working class of people. It's to keep working people, but even then, there are a lot of laws though that I think are good. So I don't know, because I don't think that I'm good at explaining like law.
I think I get what you're saying. So like, let me give you an example, and you tell me if it's in line with what you thought, right? Let's say compare how like someone who's white from a wealthy neighborhood gets caught in Kansas with, I don't know, an ounce of marijuana, for example, compared to how a young black man who comes from a poorer family would be treated with the exact same ounce of marijuana. And what you're saying is, yeah, the law treats, you know, the wealthy and the privileged much better one way, and then uses with the exploited classes to really crack down and oppress them. Is that like along the lines of what you were thinking?
Yeah, that could definitely. I mean, that definitely is that is definitely the case. But like, I think that's especially like an issue within this country, within the United States. I think that that's especially like a predominant issue. But like, I don't think that like laws in general are bad. So it kind of I don't. So that's why I was saying that I don't think that I'm like good at explaining this,
Yeah.
because
Yeah,
I
I don't
think
think
that.
Luxemburg was trying to say the law in general is bad.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can look at this the same way that she said that liberal democracy has incited the seeds of proletarian democracy.
Mm-hmm. I think that's actually the next quote we have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just,
Go ahead.
can I make, yeah, just a quick comment. Hi guys, haven't been here in a while. I thought I like actually combine. I like an intersection between the two definitions, if you will, of not definitions. We were talking about laws. Danny made a really good comment about how laws are in fact used by the bourgeois to not to oppress, but to control the means of production and so on. So they are in fact used in a negative connotation by the by those who are in control over those who are oppressed. And I think there was another comment, I'm not sure who made it, I think Nick, was about how how laws provide legitimacy for an already existing society.
Mm-hmm.
So
Are you still there, Marty? It sounded like you got cut
sorry
off.
about that. I got
Oh, you're
off.
good. That was
Yeah.
Sam who said that, by the way.
Hey, yeah, no, yes, thanks, Sam. It was bringing legitimacy to an already existing society again. So I think there are two roles really that laws play. They might be from two different perspectives, but they are concurrent. They happen at the same time, but they're not necessarily. I mean, laws can be perverted, so they're not necessarily. I'll say bad laws. Are not necessarily. They are exploitable, but they're not necessarily there for the exploitation. They are there to organize in a sense, but they are easily perverted. But maybe because of the enforcement or something further down the line.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, that's a good point. I agree with that, Marty. Like it can be both at the same time. Let's see.
I think that one thing worth noting on this is how the amount of money you have really, really impacts the way the law is enforced upon yourself. Like, if you can afford to hire a good lawyer, you can you can either get out of or negotiate down the sentence of a lot of crimes there's a lot of crimes where there's an option between paying a fine or going to jail for some amount of time. If you're wealthy, you can just pay the fine, and it's like, oh, it just costs me $10,000 to break this law. Cool. Cost of doing business sometimes. Whereas for a poorer person, it's like, oh, I'm going to jail for a year for this. And that's not even to talk about like laws regarding like corporate crimes. Like the punishment that is meted out for stealing $50,000 in wages from somebody is very different from the punishment meted out if I were to break into Justin's house and steal $50,000.
I thought you were talking about something that happened here.
No, yeah, that's absolutely true. That's a good point, John. Yeah, because think of it like in China, for example. Let's talk about China. So, and there are similar incidents in the United States, right? There was it was about last year or something, I believe, but in the United States there was an infant formula factory that put out a batch of poison, like, you know, it was improperly manufactured or something. It ended up killing a bunch of babies trying to drink formula, and there was a shortage as well. There's a number of things going on. What happened there? Absolutely nothing. Like, as far as I know, this company can create shortages due to mismanagement as well as straight kill infant babies with their faulty product, right? Nothing happened to them in the great pro-life nation of America, right? But what happened in China, it wasn't last year, I think it was in like 2009 or 2010, but a similar incident happened where this company got careless and didn't have safety standards, and they released poison formula, killed some babies. And what did the Chinese government do? They straight arrested the CEO, put him on trial, and gave him the death penalty and executed him. So it's like John says, like, what we crack down on and what we don't is very much a reflection of the priorities. Does anyone else have any comments on the law? I think we've discussed this one pretty good, but feel free to ask or raise anything else.
The company was Abbott Laboratories.
Abbott Laboratories? Okay.
Well, I think that what it is I was thinking about the law was kind of elaborated by other people. It's like the law itself, I don't think is the problem, or at least in a lot of cases, it depends on what it is, but laws are not equally dished out to like all people of the same or all people, all different types of people. But if you are within if you are more rich or have more money, then the way that the law deals with you is different than a poor person.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And I also think, and again, I don't knock Luxemburg for talking about this because she wasn't in the United States, but in our case in particular, Petamilo, in addition to what you said about money, race, like, you cannot ignore people's race, and it has the same effect, because race is kind of related to class. But yeah, like, I completely agree with that.
This is a personal anecdote, but some of my friends and I, basically, we got caught smoking weed in a car late at night. The officer didn't see anything, but like, he ended up like letting us go, like, basically, hey, I wouldn't be here in 20 minutes if I were you. And we were like, oh, thanks, officer, and we got out of there. But there was definitely a smell around. He had probable cause to search the car. Like, in that moment, I'm like, oh, if I was like Black or Hispanic in this situation, car is searched immediately. They find the shit we threw in the trunk, and we're getting taken to the station tonight. But literally, just because the three of us were white in an upper middle class area, the police officer was like, I could see the gears turning in his head, like, oh, I've had friends that have been there before. I'll let him off.
Yeah,
like,
that's.
I witnessed it firsthand.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, so when I was in the Army, I got in a bit of trouble, and basically they could have thrown the book at me for drug use and stuff. Instead, I got sent to rehab, and it was treated as a medical issue, which, for the record, I think that's the correct way that any drug charge or whatever should be handled. from like a reformist perspective anyways. Obviously we need to get rid of the whole laws, but yeah, like, and I am absolutely confident that the reason I was able to be recommended for treatment and not pursued as a criminal matter is, like you said, John, I'm a wealthier white dude, whereas with poorer people who aren't white, they get their kids confiscated from them, they get thrown in prison. Yeah, like, it's, yeah, absolutely very real thing. And I think it goes back to what Luxemburg was talking about here, about, and a lot of the ways that people are talking about here, I think, fit into the idea she's saying about how this domination rests on a real economic relation and not so much on acquired rights, right? Yeah, anyone else want to make any comments?
I just wanted to emphasize on these real economic relations is that while all these legal and not so legal rights exist, the whole basis of the system is not based on legal rights, but based on real economic relations between individuals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. Okay, I'm gonna go to the next one so we can keep moving. By the way, I did put out that this session would be going a little longer just because, as you can see, it's pretty dense. So this one says, consequently, when we consider the question being, by what means did the bourgeoisie of the Middle Ages succeed in raising itself under the yoke of feudal absolutism? So she said, when we consider that question from the abstract viewpoint, not from the historical viewpoint, we can imagine, in view of the former class relations, a legal passage, according to the reformist method, from feudal society to bourgeois society. But what do we see in reality? In reality, we see that the legal reforms not only do not obviate the seizure of power by the bourgeoisie, but have, on the contrary, prepared for it and led to it. A formal social-political transformation was indispensable for the abolition of slavery, as well as for the complete suppression of feudalism. That's on page 519 of the paper text, right? So, I think one is, well, one question I have is, what legal reforms in our contemporary society, what are some reforms that people might think of that might have the same effect to help us prepare for and lend to a revolution?
I think one that comes to mind, what I was talking about earlier, is the PROS Act, or the Protecting the Right to Organize Act.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's still being debated today or not, but it just permitted like labor organizers to and participate union memberships and strikes and whatnot, and stuff like that is important to help towards revolutionary action.
Yes, that's absolutely true. But like, notice the reasoning there, right? Because like Luxemburg says multiple times, like, revolutionaries aren't opposed to working in the legal realm. But with what Nick just said, he said we support the PRO Act because it makes it easier for revolutionaries to organize. We don't support it because, oh well, this greatly reduces the harm and therefore legitimately improves society under capitalism, right? Nick says we should support that because it makes organizing for a revolution that much easier and effective. Like, does everyone see that difference?
Yeah, I think it's kind of in the same vein as any reform we try to advocate for like more ethical policing or more ethical use of the FBI. Not that we're going to get too far with those pursuits, but any sort of reform to make those agencies more accountable, A, alleviates immediate harm being caused by the system, but B, enables organization to happen more effectively when cops can't use straight up illegal methods to spy on organizers and to stop organizers from coordinating actions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think we have to dig in a little bit deeper to that example, because if we look at how police, and that's a good thing you brought up, John. But I think if you look at how the police departments have used a lot of this demand for reforms, right, is a really good example we should investigate, because think about what's happened in the wake of every police execution. Think about what happened in the wake of Trayvon Martin, right? Or like way back in the day with George Zimmerman. What happened to I think it was in Florida, right? I think he was in Florida at the police department there.
That's correct.
Yeah, yeah. So the police department there was proven to have a huge issue of racism, and they got more money from. They said, "Oh, well, obviously this police department is lacking, so let's go ahead and give them more money for additional training." So you're telling me that this police department executes an innocent human being who wasn't hurting anyone, and they have a racial prejudice, and they get more money and resources. You know what I mean? So in a sense, and then that kind of diffuses people's revolutionary tendencies. But also, John, I think you were also correct in that some of these reforms, like I think it was called the Church Committee in the 1970s, where that's where you've probably heard of COINTELPRO, the FBI counterintelligence program, where it was revealed, like John said, the FBI and the CIA were doing all kinds of just blatantly illegal stuff. Like the CIA was betraying its mandate and to not spy on Americans, getting and selling LSD to Charles Manson. It's a whole nother story. Doing like mind control experiments, just all kinds of ridiculous stuff, way overstepping its bounds. And because of that legal inquiry, it did drive the public opinion to the point where the FBI and stuff had to be like, okay, we're gonna back off of this, not because the law is a mystical property, but because there's just because of public outcry and news coverage and stuff. And it did make it easier, as John said, for organizers to come in and, to organize and not have the police on their back so much. But I just wanted to push back a little bit specifically on that example, because sometimes that can be used, ironically enough, in a way that advocates a very reformist agenda.
Yeah, I entirely agree. Like, obviously that wasn't the outcome the activists wanted, but we have to be prepared to look at, okay, what happens when we get thousands of people marching in the streets demanding reform? Do we get reform or do we get repression?
I think anytime there's thousands of people marching in the streets, it's generally a good thing. Generally, not always, but generally. But that's a good point that I think we'll get to in another slide about that exact topic. Does anyone else have any?
I think this agrees with your point, but it's like a bit of a two-edged sword. I mean, we had the George Floyd protests, and now we have an urban warfare center being constructed in Atlanta in the wake of that.
Yes. Yeah, that's very much related to this, because I think on the ground organizers, when they advocate for these, like a spontaneous demand of the people to, hey, we need to hold our police officers accountable. Like, if that's coming from everyday working people, I'm not going to sit there and lecture, like, actually, that's bourgeois reformism, and, but notice how when it comes from, like, the Democratic Party, like when Nancy Pelosi or Kamala Harris are up there, or Joe Biden talking about, yeah, and therefore we're going to give a bunch of money, I think in that case it is appropriate to point out how that's bourgeois reformism. You know what I mean? But organic demands can come from the people that might take the form of a reformism, but because they're organic demands from the masses, I think as communists our job can be to not be like, oh, you're wrong, and condescend them, but struggle with them and show them, like, hey, we tried this out, how did that work out? Can you think of a different solution?
Justin, I think that's very well put, because I think we should always be aware that that is always going to be the reaction of like an exploitative system. Is when you call it out, it will try to get around your accusations in a sense. I'll try to find a new state of equilibrium, if you will. Man was killed. People protested. Now police are going to be more devious, if you will, and they're going to get more training, but they're not going to change the main perspective with which they approach people, or especially economically. And so reform is always kind of always going to be there, but I don't want to jump to conclusions. The book is Reform or Revolution. I don't. I'm from Egypt. I know some people I've not met on this group yet. And I was there like 12 years ago during the Arab Spring. And whenever we discuss anything here, again, I don't want to jump ahead, but I think it's very U.S. centric, which is good because we live here now and have to be grounded. But a lot of the discussions, to me, everything assumes that you're not against an out fascist system where. So we're talking about laws today. So long as they are followed somehow, in a sense, and there are courts, we can talk about them. But I just want to make it clear. Like for me, for example, when I think about laws, when I lived in Egypt, I did not believe that laws mattered at all. The only thing that mattered was your economic status. The example about getting caught smoking weed in the car late at night. Can't tell you how many times that happened there, and it's the difference between getting out of it and getting beaten up that night is your economic status. Not as much, over there, ethnic, differences. Egypt being mostly, similar race. But again, just want to keep it up, in our minds that the system will always find a way to go on, get around, you calling out its egregious flaws.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, Marty, I want to thank you for sharing that because it is genuinely interesting, and I know Danny's also not from the United States, but like I love when people from different countries like chime in and we learn about that because it's like it's like you said, sometimes we do get a little U.S. centric in our examples, but yeah, like absolutely, I absolutely agree with that. That the law at the end of the day, the system is going to do whatever it wants, so therefore. Why, like, again, I'm not saying it's a good thing to go out and just, because what you don't want to do is just, the law doesn't matter, so therefore I'm just going to go out and commit a bunch of illegal crimes that'll put me and my comrades in jeopardy, right? I don't think that's a good idea. But yeah, like Mahdi said, if the system is going to disregard the rules whenever, then it's like, at a certain point, you're like, these rules are all just made up.
Yes. Yes. Focus on also making that clear as you work for reform. Is that just making clear the flaws in the system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. I do want to move on to the next slide, just so we can continue moving. But this is a good topic of discussion. So this next quote from chapter 8, I didn't write the page number down. It's after page 519 though. But anyways, it says, if democracy has become superfluous or annoying to the bourgeoisie, it is, on the contrary, necessary and indispensable to the working class. It is necessary to the working class because it creates the political form, so autonomous administration, electoral rights, etc., which will serve the proletariat as fulcrums in its task of transforming bourgeois society. Democracy is indispensable to the working class because only through the exercise of its democratic rights in the struggle for democracy can the proletariat ever become aware of its class interest and its historic task. In a word, democracy is indispensable, not because it renders superfluous the conquest of political power by the proletariat, but because democracy renders this conquest of power both necessary and possible. So she's kind of saying like the seeds of the socialist future we already had, or our socialist future, the seeds that will be used to grow that are already contained in right now. For example, voting rights is a huge one. I wanted to bring that one up too. Because as you know, in this country, there's a large attack on voting rights of, whether it's like poor people, people of different races. There's some people who unironically think the women should no longer have the right to vote as well on the far right. So it's like, voting and going to the ballot box every, 2 or 4 years or whatever is not the solution to capitalism, but at the same time, like anyone who's trying to roll back the right of poor people, of women, of people of color, etc., anyone who tries to roll back their right to vote, I think that's still like not only is that a reactionary thing we should protect against, but also that idea of universal enfranchisement, that idea of universal suffrage and all that is very much one of the foundations that'll have to be necessary in socialism, right? That's how I interpreted it. But what about everyone else?
Well, at very least, we are moving in a, with regards to suffrage, at least participation in the process. That is definitely something that's moving in the right direction. So there's no need to take that back. You know, when I say like the system, for example, is stacked against us, um, we're still want to use the system, which is just the sum of people, the production, the economy, and so on. We just want to use it in a different way that's more equitable, for example. And so there's absolutely no need for isolation or for, as you say, rolling back any rights that are already there.
Mm-hmm. It sounded like someone else wanted to say something. Okay, so I'll open with a question then. So I said, also another thing I wrote it out here was that Luxemburg is saying that the masses cannot be forced to adopt a revolutionary outlook. So like, if that's the case, then how do we struggle alongside the masses and educate them and try to get people to wake up to, like Mahdi said, like the system is going to be used against you, and it is kind of subjective like that. But how do we do that in a way that doesn't lend to us taking a commandist attitude? And by commandist, I mean just trying to boss people around. Like, I am the communist, and I know everything about communism, and therefore the workers will do X, Y, and Z. Like, how do you get my point? Like, how do you avoid falling into that trap while still educating people and developing them? Um, I think, to give my own answer to it, I think that's like by the practice of struggling itself becomes an educational concept, because I legitimately think that the masses as a collective are very intelligent, um, and that they can see things. They're not easily deceived. It's like and so by struggling for these reforms, if they fail, then you can be like, look, we tried this out. How did that work out? And let them come to their own conclusion. Or it's in the event they succeed, then that when it succeeds and inevitably might not work the way we want, then I think that can also be like an educational opportunity. But I think the unifying theme is that we tell people, like, we don't tell people what to think. We point things out and let them come to their own conclusions, which inevitably is going to be correct, I believe.
George Jackson said that we don't have it easy because we don't, as opposed to the ruling class, we don't have to teach people what to think, but teach people how to think.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree with that, and that is related to a later topic in the chapters here. Rosa talks about exactly that, Danny.
I think it's, sorry if I cut someone off, but I see a very interesting, but not interesting actually. The word I want to focus on is class interest. I mean, just research, people are smart. They know what they want. So I think of it as they know where their interests lie. And so by being a partner with people who may not be of a revolutionary bent, because they know their interest. That's why, for example, focusing on things like labor rights or human rights or healthcare, for example, things that touch people's life immediately, rather than trying to make them understand, to make the masses understand that the system under which they rule, which is something that's intangible, is oppressive. They are oppressed. They are within the oppression. It's hard for them, I think. Again, I say that when I mean people in general who may not whose main whatever occupation in life is not political or social. They're something that is they're making a living. So it's hard for them to take a step back and realize that. And if they do realize it, it's you pointing that out to them, I think, doesn't create as useful of a connection or a bond as you do if you are fighting for their, again, labor, human rights, healthcare, and so on. That's how I see this part, I guess.
So, is Luxemburg saying that where do correct ideas come from? Do they spring from the mind fully formed? Are they discovered? No, they come from social practice. That's what this essentially says, right? You can only discover truth in the right, correct way to transform society through social practice. It's like Mao. It's like Mao said it on practice.
Yes, that is 100% true. I think there's another Mao quote that said like, "Oh, are students organizing a mass strike on campus? That sounds like the best university education I've ever heard of." That's not the exact quote, but he says something to that spirit. So yes, collective struggle. Because you got to think how much ideology in America and how much education is dedicated to getting us to think of ourselves as like the individual neoliberal rational market consumer that's just a completely isolated speck, right? How much of and when in reality it's like Sam said, correct ideas come from collective social practice, and how are you going to learn to think about yourself as a class unless you're struggling next to and alongside other people in your class as a collective group? I agree with that. Okay, anyone else comments about this?
I really liked the contrast that got brought up about like Luxemburg saying we don't just come up with these ideas and then impose them on people. We have to like learn about them through practice. Like we have to like discover them through our like interactions with the real world and real movement. And it's like I do scientific research as a large part of what I do in grad school, and like how worthless would my research be if all I did was work in hypotheticals and never connect it to real world data that had been measured anywhere? It's like this doesn't do anything. This doesn't connect to anything. How can I know that this random theory I've developed is actually useful for anything in the real world if I don't then go and build an experiment and test it physically and see that it bears out? Like you have to have that back and forth, that dialectical relationship between theory and practice.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
After all,
absolutely.
we're scientific socialists.
Yeah, we are. That's a huge topic in the next upcoming chapters. I think that's also true. Any other comments on this? Okay, moving to the next one. Okay, so now we're out of chapter 8. Now we're on chapter 9 called Collapse, right? So this one was pretty much a diss track for Bernstein, and I made a comment about it because it seemed like for 3 pages, just every paragraph went like, and Bernstein therefore does this, and is and therefore Bernstein, and just when that was a little grammatical quirk, but anyways. So this chapter is primarily Luxemburg's critique of Bernstein for abandoning the necessity of capital collapse, as well as abdication of the dialectical way of thinking. So she then demonstrates what happened that when we abandon the foundations of scientific socialism and Marxism, so in other words, capitalist crisis theory, the idea of a class struggle, and the method, like Danny was saying earlier, the correct way of thinking, how to think, the dialectical materialism, that means we consequently abandon socialism with like a big S socialism and cease to support the working class as a whole. So this chapter can basically be summarized as a lesson in the importance of standing firm by the foundational principles of Marxism and scientific socialism, and how she just proves this is like the only way to bring about a socialist revolution, right? Before we get into the questions, did anyone have anything they want to bring up? Okay, I'm going to go to the next one. So this the quote says, Bernstein began his revision of the social democracy by abandoning the theory of capitalist collapse. The latter, however, is the cornerstone of scientific socialism. By rejecting it, Bernstein also rejects the whole doctrine of socialism. In the course of his discussion, he abandons one after another of the positions of socialism in order to be able to maintain his first affirmation. And then some stuff. And it says, therefore, Bernstein thus travels in a logical sequences from A to Z. He began by abandoning the final aim and supposedly keeping the movement. But as there can be no socialist movement without a socialist aim, he ends by renouncing the movement. That's on page 528 and 529 of the paperback. Yeah, so this one I felt was really important. So why is capitalism prone to collapse, like that, as she says here? Because she says the idea that capitalism is inherently prone to collapse, she says that's the most important idea of socialism. So, like, why, I guess? Why does it tend to happen?
As an observer, not an expert, I think it's the need for growth, at the very least that.
Yeah, very much. How so?
There are a lot of details into that, at least. Well, again, as at a very basic level, the need for capital to grow, basically, and so that is what drives, strategic decisions made on a small company level, on a big corporation level, and now on a country level, and so it just takes everything, puts it into this rhythm. And maybe someone can say that more clearly.
Yeah, no, that's extremely clear. Like the constant demand for growth is very much one of the fundamental, in my opinion, one of the fundamental driving forces of collapse. Anyone else?
And one of the reasons is obviously to make more profit, but also to be more secure. And because there's competition, and they have to compete with other companies. Because production and the economy is bound up in private and individual interests as opposed to the collective interest.
Yes, that is also true. A contradiction between collective interests and private interests, which goes back to the state and law we discussed earlier, as well as the constant need for profit and the competition motive. Yes, that's all huge contributing factor. Anyone else? Or any comments on anything? Okay, so now that we've established why it's prone to collapse, so I guess more specifically, like why, she has a whole laundry list of just logical links she makes, like she says, from A to Z, about like he abandons this, and then that causes him to abandon this. But if you notice, the chain, like she said, begins with capitalist collapse. So why is the idea that capitalism is inherently unstable and prone to collapse? Why does Luxemburg argue here that this is the cornerstone of scientific socialism?
Because it is the conclusion of all the assumptions that scientific socialism is based on.
Yes.
To claim the opposite, that capitalism won't collapse, flies directly in the face of all the evidence we've seen over history that societies transform by collapsing. Feudalism collapsed to give into capitalism, and slave society collapsed to give into feudalism. And so that is the entire basis of scientific socialism, is historical materialism. This is what happened in the past based on what we've observed in the past. This will happen. That's the scientific method. And so to deny that capitalism will collapse says that it is a special, unique mode of production that that disobeys the laws of social reproduction. That is the entire premise. To deny that capitalism collapses denies the entire premise of the scientific method.
I want to say something about the capitalism prone to collapse. If you deny that, like, capitalism collapses, or at least the system sort of does, like, a point where massive amounts of people lose what it is that they have, you deny that it is that property and capital gets concentrated into fewer and fewer hands within a capitalist system. So I mean, you're denying something that, if Bernstein denies that, like, he denies how it is that capitalism itself works. So he wouldn't be able to, like, understand revolution if it is that he doesn't, like, understand this thing that is fundamental to understanding capitalism, that property and capital will be concentrated into fewer and fewer hands through a collapse where massive amounts of people will lose the things that they have, and then over time, through collapses of the economy, the concentration will get further and further into the hands of a very small amount of people.
Yeah, so I think, it's all, because to deny it is to deny, like Sam and Petamilo said, is to deny scientific evidence. Like, I view it as like, okay, me being like a computer nerd, I view it as like trying to think of like a circuit board without a NAND gate. A NAND gate is like the not and it's like you can construct every other logical operator from a NAND gate, even if it's really drawn out, but that's neither here nor there. The point is, with this one type of logical gate, you can construct every other type of circuit from it. And what Bernstein's trying to do is deny and get rid of the NAND gate, so to speak, of scientific socialism, which is the collapse doctrine. That's how I think about it anyway.
But at the same time, he's denying that capital is going to become more concentrated in the hands of a few people and few corporations. Because look how many people have shares. Like, they're all shareholders of Amazon.
And then, so class struggle, why is it, quote, inherent and inevitable within a class-based society like capitalism, right?
Class struggle, I mean, the thing about it is that, I think that both classes, the property-owning class, small property-owning class, and the working class, I mean, when it's in terms of a situation where it is that the workers are not class consciousness, the property owning class, they are participating in their own forms of class struggle against the working class, like them, concentrating fewer and fewer property into their hands, and they are participating in their own class struggle. So the thing is that the working class needs to understand where it lies, what its interests are, in order for the working class to understand what is best for itself, because I think that the property owning class understands their position much better than a lot of the working class do, or at least they understand, or maybe they don't. I'm not sure.
No, I agree with you absolutely, and that's correct, because think about it. All right. So we want to talk. We all know what a labor union is here, right? But what about a capitalist union? Like Petamilo was saying about, the capitalist class is very much conscious that they have a collective interest together, and that it is opposed to ours. And what do they call that collective interest? It's called the United States Chamber of Commerce. Like, it's literally plain as day right there. That's exactly what that is. But yeah, that's absolutely true.
It's just like class struggle isn't only one thing for the workers, and not understanding that like the class of people who the capitalist class, they are participating in a constant class struggle in society against the working class.
Mm-hmm.
To add some specificity to what you're saying, Petamillo, it's like the latest bout of inflation is certainly an exercise in class struggle of the bourgeoisie against the proletariat.
Yeah, like
we found that the proletariat has leverage over the COVID pandemic because we found out that if the general working person doesn't go to work, society collapses. And the moment that the working class started to find that out and the government started to pass laws that could benefit working people, we see inflation come, which, well, you can use fancy economic theories to justify it all day. The act of inflation is in the moment when prices are increased. And many of these prices that have been increased in like goods and services we consume have not been increased in keeping with the cost of their inputs going up. It has been, this increase in prices has gone into record profits that we've seen so many companies reap in 2022. Like, the evidence is already there that this was just class war.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's absolutely true.
But those are giving specific examples. I mean, it's useful to recognize it, but it doesn't really get to the heart of why it is inherent, inevitable, right?
That's true.
So we're talking about, I mean, I use this phrase a lot, but we're talking about the symptoms and not the cause.
Mm-hmm.
So class struggle is inherent and inevitable in capitalism solely because of the definition of capitalism, right? The two opposing classes that are necessarily required for capitalism. The fact that there are two whose interests are mutually exclusive, the owning class and the working class, that in and of itself will necessarily lead to the class struggle.
To add to what you're saying, even like the class interest of the capitalist class is the interest of capital, which is infinite growth in a finite world. And so we have that inherent contradiction that just makes the whole system inevitably untenable and leads to collapse because capital exists to increase in value, and in a finite world we can only extract and produce and create so much value.
Yeah, that's exactly what Madi was saying. Yeah. And Sam, that was wonderful. You took what I was going to say. As a preview to what's coming up in Chapter 10, if you want to abstract a layer away from what Sam said, kind of like how he abstracted from what John said, well, there's a certain way of thinking, which goes in line with what Danny was saying, that teaches us to analyze things like that. That teaches us to look at, like Sam said, here's capitalism. It is defined by two classes that have a diametrically incompatible relationship, and that method's called dialectical materialism, which she's about to talk about here. But yeah, like this is it's very much all about the dialectics, because there are some communists and some Marxists and who believe that they're called analytic Marxists, and I kind of like them because I'm an analytic philosophy guy, but I also disagree with them because they think you can just abstract away dialectical materialism, and I'm getting on a tangent here, but we'll talk about that one soon. But yeah, that's absolutely true. Okay, any other comments on this? I think we covered it pretty well. Okay. Whoop, let me click on the window again. Okay, oh yeah, so let me see how much left we got here, because I know we're running up on... Okay. We'll be okay. So this is his doctrine, composed of bits of all possible systems, seems upon first consideration to be completely free from prejudices. For Bernstein does not like talk of party science, quote unquote, or to be more exact, of class science, any more than he likes to talk of class liberalism or class morality. He thinks he succeeds in expressing human, general, abstract science, abstract liberalism, and abstract morality. But since the society of reality is made up of classes which have diametrically opposed interested aspirations and conceptions, with a general human science in social questions, and abstract liberalism and abstract morality are at present illusions, pure utopia. That's kind of exactly what Sam was saying there. The science, the democracy, the morality considered by Bernstein of as general human are merely the dominant science, dominant democracy, dominant morality that is bourgeois science, bourgeois democracy, and bourgeois morality, right? Did someone have something they wanted to say? I thought I heard someone button in. So I thought, okay, I think we talked pretty well at length about how morality and democracy can be influenced by this class. But this is just I thought it was interesting. How is science influenced by social class? Isn't science supposed to be just an objective doctrine of pure facts?
The way that it is that subjects are taught are definitely influenced in the modern day by who it is, who the ruling class is. So, like in school, we're taught subjects as isolated sort of things, like they're not interconnected, and we don't teach within schools, like it's just math, science. So I've heard people ask before, is like math related to science? And it's those types of like dumb questions which really is the fault of like how it is that things are not taught in their like interrelations, and they're taught as isolated things. Like math is just like just solve this abstract formula for no reason, don't learn anything about like why, like how this was conceived of, what the purpose of this thing is. And I think that that's because when it is that we're taught like subjects, it's we only are taught things to like know how to like just to be able to do or solve like a test, and not to be like well informed or actually be educated. So it's just like training people to become a part of the workforce by just making them do like remember a thing, and then that just trains people to just be a part of the workforce and not actually be like thinking people, if that makes sense.
No, that makes absolute sense, especially as someone who studied math. Any other comments or anything on this?
Yeah, that is absolutely correct. Now, I'll give you my perspective from research. I'm doing a postdoc now, so I'm actually working with people from different universities across the U.S. and publishing papers very slowly though. But I can tell you that how funding flows, where it comes from, who ends up owning the funding, and hiring other researchers and really leading the projects. It is very stratified, and it is very bourgeois. There are lots of criticisms against like the academic or scientific community, which are they're only people, so I'll tell you that the criticisms are very well earned. The one thing that's peer review and academic integrity, honestly, that is the one area where I think the science differs truly. That's where it's kind of very democratic, is that your paper gets reviewed by people who have been picked out, so there's no conflict of interest and so on. And if your findings pass muster, then your paper gets published. And if someone finds an issue with your paper, they can publish their own research. Papers get corrected, retracted, and so on. So that is working. But the thing that drives that is the funding, and where the funding comes from. It comes, yeah. I mean, if you just have a look at the, and again, this has to be within one discipline. I'm a data scientist, so I work with people from different kind of work with geologists, with biologists. But if you take one discipline like geology or mineralogy and look at all the big names, the people who published, the people who do publish, they are most likely, they're all older white men who are generally well off, who started from a position of ability, ability to actually, work in research while not making a lot of money because of family wealth and so on. So that's my perspective. I mean, but so it's kind of complex. It's not free flowing. It's not fully democratic. That goes for public and private funding as well, both.
No, I agree with that completely. Yeah, especially Madi, I like what you said about the money being. I think that is how class influences science because, so like Madi, I'm also a data scientist. I also I've not done it professionally, but I know quite a bit about machine learning. Like I just design that stuff in my spare time for fun. And you got to look at the type of algorithms that are actively researched, the type of programming languages that we use that are actively researched, influences the direction that scientific research goes in, right? And a lot of that money and stuff comes from the Pentagon, for example. So you got to think like I'm trying to think of an example, image recognition, right? Image recognition gets pushed to the forefront of like AI generated images, and a lot of people talk about how that's, a lot of artists think that's like a threat to their career, and on some level it is, because that is one of the motivations that these big companies have, is to be like, Disney would rather just not pay to have an artist on staff when they could just pay $10 to the or not the chat GPT, the whatever the image generation one is, I forget what it's called, but anyways, I'll just rather pay $10 to that API rather than keep a variable labor expense. This is a lot cheaper, and in that way, that kind of AI art generated gets done. But that's the other thing, how it directs it too, is a lot of these AI technologies like image recognition, for example, is a very proven track record that if you give it like X-ray and CT scans of someone's lungs, the computer is better, like actually better at diagnosing lung cancer from those scans than a human doctor with a medical education. And that could save and improve so many people's lives, right? If that were freely available to everyone and they were able to use it. But how does this image recognition end up getting applied in capitalism? If they do it for that medical imaging, they're going to charge an arm and a leg for it, and therefore it won't be accessible. But more often, it's like, how can we make this predator drone forensic recognition so that the drone with missiles on it from 10,000 feet above can zoom in on someone's face and scan it against a database of, quote unquote terrorists, and then therefore we'll just blow them up. Like, that's how the stuff actually gets applied under capitalism, right? When in reality, and therefore that's how I believe science and engineering as disciplines are influenced by class. Yeah, and then look how it ends up. That's how I see it.
You brought up a great point that honestly I did not think of, but as dual use technologies, if you will, things that are that start in science and scientific research and are prodded and pushed and so that when they mature, the technologies that are applied in security, for example, like image recognition with drones or image recognition with whatever, to be honest. But ChatGPT or language models have been, over the past 20 years have really been, they've been developing, but they're funded by places like DARPA, for example, all sorts of different levels of applications. And what you get is something like ChatGPT, for example, as an application to the masses. But what is really happening behind the scene is mass surveillance, and so they are interlinked right now. Companies like Palantir, or whatever, they start off. They're founded for the explicit purpose of funding research, and Palantir they were they come and recruit in my school where they pick up young undergraduates who've just graduated or just gotten their master's degrees, and they just, to them it's like it's the best job ever, but they are not even aware that they are part of the military industrial complex, if you will, or that they're working on arms, if you will, which they are.
Yeah, that's 100% right. It's even like that for people in the military too, believe it or not. But yeah. On the interest of time, I think we've discussed this one enough anyways. Does anyone have any other comments on this one before we move on? I'm gonna stay or go ahead.
Which one? The have we talked about the next two after the how can science be influenced by class?
Oh yeah, I just wanted to say real quick, like I know I said it'd be an hour and a half, but I also said that this one is going to be dense. There's a lot to talk about, so don't feel like I would love everyone to stay around. I'm gonna stay around, but I know it's getting to be about that time, so if someone has to go, that's perfectly fine. But I will continue on with this. It's taken a while. Okay, yeah. So proletarian morale. I think So if we talk about how we just talked about how science influences, how class influences science, right? So obviously we have and same with morality. So we have a bourgeois morality and a bourgeois science, so to speak. So my question was, just to get everyone thinking, what is proletarian morality and the proletarian science? What does that look like?
What does proletarian morality look like? Proletarian science? Is that the question?
Yeah, that's the question. I want to see what other
okay,
people
well,
think.
I mean, the thing about it is that how it is that you teach a certain subject has a lot of times has like a political connotation around it. So it's kind of goes back to what I said, like originally, like how subjects aren't taught within their interrelation and are just taught as isolated sort of things just to like be able to write down on a test. So I mean, a science that would be distinguishingly working class in character would describe how it is that this certain subject can help within the interests of the working class, kind of, in like framing the subject and like why we learned the subject to like help the workers.
So, like, instead of teaching, I don't know, history, for example, well, you need to know this so you can get a good score on the AP history exam and therefore get out of, save money on college credits for a college-level history class. Say, oh, we teach history because history is, like, of the class struggle and everything. And as historical materialists, that's, like, we teach it from that perspective rather than just the rote memorization of facts, right?
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely with that one. Is anyone else, or particularly like science or morality? How does that look, or anything else really?
I think
I have one comment. Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, thanks. I think, like, speaking about science, that there's going to be in a socialist society, there would be a huge revolution in the way science works because it's being directed towards an entirely different end. Like, science under capitalism, I would categorize it as directed towards two main ends. One of them being the expansion of production and the increase of productivity, which isn't inherently bad, but under capitalism is an excuse to pay workers less and produce more. And then also science as a way to manage the contradictions of capitalism. Like, capitalists are being forced to invest in science that addresses the climate crisis now because they've created such a mess for themselves that they're facing extinction otherwise. But under a society controlled by the proletarian, we could apply our scientific knowledge. We could look at things. It's like, okay, what are the problems that people have? Oh, we don't have enough housing. How can we make scientific advancements that allow us to supply more better housing to people at using as little human labor as possible. Like, that is such a different. Scientists like answer questions and discover things. There's not a particular necessary motive to the scientific method. It's like, okay, what problem do you direct yourself to solve? And so I think the complete and entire pivot of what problems we as a society will ask our scientists to solve has like incredible potential, and it makes me optimistic about the future. But it's just a huge contrast between what we do today with science.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, I like that, John. And I would say one comment on what John said is I think that kind of takes away the profitability motive, in research, for example. So scientists are free to look at more problems than they currently are. They're restricted right now to, like you said, a really important thing is fixing problems with the current way we do things, like current manufacturing and so on. What I was going to say, honestly, was about morality. I was not going to say what I think it is, but what I think it shouldn't be is I don't think proletarian morality should be utilitarianism. For example, some kind of way to measure, if you will, the greater good, because I don't think there is. It's problematic. So there's something unscientific about morality, I think, and so we shouldn't miss that. But John brings up a good point. Maybe he didn't make the point. I felt like there could be a combination of both, because again, science is about asking questions, usually to solve problems, and general morality is about giving everyone a fair chance, if you will. And these two could be part of one thing. But again, like taking away profitability, I think is probably the biggest thing I would say about scientific research or science.
Yeah. I know for myself, so I know Madi knows about it. But I also, there's two things I love to research and aren't exactly related to communism. It's freaking, I love functional programming languages, specifically one called Haskell. And there's another thing I love is just abstract symbolic logic. And I actually started to kind of program my own, it was like ternary logic, with so 3-value logic instead of 2-value binary logic. Anyways, I'm not going to go into a whole lecture about it. My point is, like, now that I'm trying to find work, and that means I have to read, I only have so much time in a day, right, between talking, with my kids and this group, and then my job and all that. Like, I'm only one guy. So I try and do what I can in a day, and I have to, because I have to live on the market as a worker, and I understand I'm in a very privileged place compared to some, but I have to focus on what's profitable for these employers, right? And I'm not saying I'm too good for that, but what I am saying is, like, if I didn't have to waste all of my time, like, trying to study something because I need to survive, whereas I could pursue my own interest of my topic that might not have an immediate application, but, like, and this is what I get from talking to one of my best friends, Jessica, who's a scientist, right? She also tells me, like, so much of her time as a scientist is consumed by, like, funding grants and stuff, as well as, like, doing what's trendy or what's applied to capitalist goals, whereas if you could just, like, say, here you go, scientist, all your basic needs are covered, and just go research this thing and let us know what you come up with. Like, I think that can honestly be the inspiration and the source of many great inventions that just completely change everything. But it doesn't happen because the people who would invent it have only so much time, and they have to spend so much of their time trying to live under capitalism. That's my point.
It is stunning to me as I've entered the world of research how much research that we draw on today was just done for the love of learning. Like, I'll be researching, like, I need this technique to solve this problem. And it's like, oh, this technique originated in the 1940s when this guy was bored and asked this super random hypothetical question and solved it. And then now I'm here turning it to a real practical use. My PhD advisor did, like, some groundbreaking scientific work about the way, like, bubbles form when substances boil. But the techniques he used were developed by people trying to figure out, when you put your coffee mug down and it leaves some coffee, and then the way that coffee ring dries with, like, more of the, like, that stain has, like, a highlight around the edges.
Mm-hmm.
You can picture a coffee stain. It's like, why does it form that like little shape? The answer to that question is hugely related to really intense stuff about how water boils, but the scientists that answer that question were like, oh, this is a fun little problem to solve. And it's like, those doing things for the love of knowledge contribute enormously to the progression of technology and science and just humanity. It's like, you don't need, my point being, you don't need a profit motive to make progress.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. And then, I guess it is to say to move on with the next one, it says, so capitalism tricks people into adopting their ideology by framing it as normal. So, like, I was just wondering if anyone had any other examples of, things that you can think of that fall into this logical trap of, like, oh, it's just, like she talks about how Bernstein says, oh, it's just science, and science is just, science with a capital S, and it's the pure ideal, when in reality there's, like, bourgeois science, right? I was just, yeah. Any examples of that? I think we discussed a lot of that.
That kind of just reminds me of the whole neoliberalism being the ideology of non-ideology.
By Nick.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't have really much to say on that. That's about it.
Oh, no, that's absolutely a good point. Claiming you are not ideological is in itself an ideological statement. Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna go to the next one. Whoop.
What
There we
about the one about the third one?
Yeah, that's what we were talking about, the third question.
Well, I wanted to say
Oh yeah, go
something
ahead.
about that. I think that it just goes back to what I've said about the last two questions. That, I mean, how it is that we're taught about, like, different subjects, and how it is that, like, it's just reinforced through the school system that the ideology is reinforced through how it is that I've described as subjects in their isolation, and not bridging the gaps and actually seeing things as being interconnected and affecting each other. Because I mean that is itself, that's a decision made, or I think that it's purposeful, because again, they just want people to just be able to, like, do a basic task, which is memorize this thing, even if it's, like, more difficult, and not actually, like, learn.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense. I'm not sure if it is what I just said makes sense.
Yeah, I get what you said. I get what you said.
Like, the ideology is reinforced through the school system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. I'm gonna move to the next one. We're almost done here, so yeah, we have, I think, 3 more. Oh yeah, so he says, this is the one with the super poetic language where she says, when he directs his keenest arrows against our dialectic system, he is really attacking the specific mode of thought employed by the conscious proletariat in the struggle for liberation. It is an attempt to break the sword that has helped the proletariat to pierce the darkness of its future. Oh my goodness, excuse me. It is an attempt to shatter the intellectual arm with the aid of which the proletariat, though materially under the yoke of the bourgeoisie, is yet enabled to triumph over the bourgeoisie. For it is our dialectical system that shows to the working class the transitory nature of this yoke, proving to workers the inevitability of their victory, and is already realizing a revolution in the domain of thoughts. That's page 531 of this paperback, right? So what exactly, I feel like we should define what exactly is dialectics. Anyone want to take a shot?
Dialectics, I think, describes a unity of opposites And I think as well that I've heard that dialectics can be described as two people who have like an argument or are trying to argue about something, and then trying to reach like a greater truth from combining both sides of the argument into something that can be like synthesizing two arguments into one greater truth. But in terms of how it is that I think Hegel describes it, I think that it's a unity of opposites and seeing things kind of in their interrelation. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Anyone else?
To me, it feels that dialectics is more about interrelations and how things interact with each other as parts of a whole of a system.
Yes. Yes, so it's about relationships, and it's about the synthesis of something new by the process of conflict, right? And yeah, I think that's good. And so I guess, what aspects of the dialectics does Bernstein specifically reject that Luxemburg is criticizing him on?
You could say that like Bernstein rejects the dialectical relationship of like maybe the capitalist class, the working class, and how it is that they're diametrically opposed to each other.
Mm-hmm. That's what I was thinking. Yes. Oh yeah, I also want to say, go back to the first one. What exactly is dialectics? Dialectics is about change. It's if you ever watch the show Breaking Bad, that little speech Walter gives in one of the first episodes, he says, "Chemistry is the study of change." That's, you could substitute the word chemistry with dialectics, and it would be just as true. Yeah, I just wanted to say that because I feel it's important to highlight. And then how does dialectical thinking help? She says, quote, "prove to workers the inevitability of their victory." Like, how is that related? I would say look at what happens when you do the opposite of that. When you embrace, when you reject dialectics and embrace non-dialectical thinking, right? What happens when you do that is you more or less turn into Bernstein. You know, maybe a couple different details here and there, but Bernstein is what happens when you don't embrace dialectics. Oh, conversely, in the process of embracing dialectics, that therefore shows the workers that Bernstein is wrong, and that's how it's like the inevitability of their victory, I think. That's how I explain it. Because the inevitability of victory is tied on the idea of a capitalist collapse.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Does anyone have any comments? Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, so in the first chapter of Stalin's Dialectical and Historical Materialism, he says, contrary to metaphysics, dialectics holds that nature is not a state of rest and immobility, stagnation and immutability, but a state of continuous movement and change, of continuous renewal and development, where something is always arising and developing, and something always disintegrating and dying away. And so that process, like you were saying, that process of motion, how everything is in constant flux and changes based on its relationships, that constant motion contains a kernel of hope, because we can we can see that this capitalist society will develop through the struggle into socialist society. Also, you should read Dialectical and Historical Materialism. It's short and it's really informative.
What book is it?
Dialectical and Historical Materialism. It's a pamphlet from
Joseph Stalin. Oh yeah, I read that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a really important one to read. Yeah, absolutely. Like the way Stalin writes it is just crystal clear, as you heard.
And I also wanted to make a comment about dialectics. The thing about dialectics is that it's important to not like apply dialectics to the world. Like if it is that, like, not like just applying it and then just expecting it to to describe everything, because describing things, I think how it is that I said it, as a unity of opposites, like everything is just a unity of opposites, like that itself like is metaphysical. So I mean, because everything isn't just like opposite, but how it is I described it, I think made it sound like it was. But the whole point that Marx and Engels were trying to do was to break with like Hegel's idealism when it came to dialectics. So I mean, I think that what it is I'm trying to say is that it's important not to like just apply dialectics to the world and just expecting it to apply to everything, because that itself would be like metaphysical, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I get what you're trying to say.
Because I'll be honest, like, I mean, I don't. Maybe it's just because I don't understand dialectics, but like, I kind of think that, like, I do believe that a lot of things are diametrically opposed to one another, but just describing everything as within a relationship of like a unity of opposites is like a metaphysical way of looking at the world. But that's just how it is that I understand it. So maybe it's just because like I don't understand dialectics, but if you are to apply dialectics to everything, that would be a metaphysical way of understanding the world, if that makes sense. So like you want to have a scientific outlook on your mode of thinking. So you don't want to have like a metaphysical, like philosophical mode of thought, like dictating your thought process.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I get the idea of what you're saying. I think that like I honestly I need to think myself of how to respond to this, because it's like it's a framework, and it's kind of like I see your point, but also like at some point you have to have just assumptions that things rest on, and you just have to make an assumption at some point. That's like all math is founded on that same part too. It all boils down to a couple of No, I need to think more on this. I'll be honest.
Well,
with you.
again, like I might just not understand like dialectics, but as it is, I've like seen it like described. Like I think that dialectics is a good way to describe like a lot of different things, or at least like when it is that you kind of just boil everything down to, okay, things are within like a unity of opposites, and then like the contradiction between like this thing and that thing drives the development of this relation forward. Like I don't, and maybe I just don't understand like the meaning of contradiction, but like the world doesn't just work on like, okay, there's a contradiction between this and that. Like it's more complicated, which I think that basically what I'm trying to say is that like you can use dialectics to sort of like make a narrative, but in terms of like actually scientifically understanding the process of like the relation between things, you really have to like go beyond the the philosophy of thinking of things as just opposites, and like this contradiction is bringing forward. Even though I do think that like contradictions between two things definitely can, but it's more I think that it's more complicated than describing it in that
I get
way.
what you're saying with that. No, like I said, I don't ever. Does anyone else ever respond to that? I gotta think. I get what you're saying though. I have to think about more about that.
I'll inject one thing, is that it takes two to dialectic, if you think about it. It's a matter of synthesizing more than one opinion about something. Opinion, again, not just opinion. Well, opinion includes, not forget about opinion, but includes a subjective aspect to it of how you think about something. That's not always the case. When we're discussing things. There's an assumption that there are two opposing perspectives or two opposing definitions, if you will, and there's a synthesis of one definition or one realization through these two.
So, wait. Could you say again?
Yeah. Again, I think it requires or presumes that there's more than one view about something. Again, as a framework, using dialectics as a framework, it requires two opinions, if you will, or two views on something, and then a synthesis of these two views through resolving the conflict between the two views.
Yeah, well, that's what I was saying. That's what I was saying about, like, you have two arguments, and then you kind of like you synthesize the two arguments to reach like a greater truth. Like that's one way that I've heard like dialectics described, and I mean that sounds like what it was that you just said.
Yeah. Sometimes the two things come. That's like from one divides into two. Sometimes that's what that means, is that the two things that are conflicting with each other emerge from within the same thing. Kind of like from within the world system of capitalism emerges two classes, right? I do, in the interest of time, I do want to move on to the next question. Because we're almost done here, but I think, like we said last time, that we need to have a session on Marxist economics. I definitely think we need to have a discussion session on the dialectical materialism, like in the abstract, because these are some things we need to think out. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna move on to the next one, just because it's almost I gotta feed my kids here soon, but we're almost done. So chapter 10, this one was really short too. Luxemburg continues the discussion from last chapter, detailing how opportunists and revisionists decry theory as being too, quote, impractical, getting in the way of the so-called, quote, results. But she details how in reality the pragmatism opportunistic revisionism gets in the way of the truly desired result of socialism, right? And then she says, because revisionists have no theoretical foundation to stand upon, that their theory, quote-unquote, ends up not actually laying out any principles, but instead they just focus solely on attacking the ideas and the theories of principled socialists. So they're kind of like being haters, but they don't got anything to replace. They just attack, right? So revisionism is therefore defined purely in terms of a negative. So in other words, their defining feature is they define themselves, oh, we're not communists. So she says about this, quote, opportunism is not a position to elaborate a positive theory capable of withstanding criticism. All it can do is to attack various isolated theses of Marxist theory, and just because Marxist doctrine constitutes one solidly constructed edifice, hope by this means to shake the entire system from the top to its foundation, right? So I wanted to ask, like, how do we see this opportunism manifest itself today?
This entire chapter made me think of Twitch political streamers.
Yes! I'm glad you thought the same. How so?
Well, specifically to quote what appears to characterize this practice above all, a certain hostility to theory. And there are certain streamers that will just say, theory is dumb, theory is bad, it's written by old white men, you don't need to read it. We can just observe our world around us and come to our own conclusions.
It's ableist to make people read theory.
Right. And so the fact that, I mean, and they still claim to be socialists, but they define themselves against tankies, air quotes there, or communist, and they're not communists or whatever. And just the entire thing is just dead on for the modern Twitch politics streamer, to me.
Yes. I completely agree with you on that. Anyone else?
I think that there's like certain politicians that try and get like not very politically conscious, politically informed people to like be a part of their campaign, to just like do everything the exact opposite way of how it was that they said that they were going to do it. Like politicians, just in general.
Mm-hmm. Like the Squad, for example, when they came in preaching the gospel of socialism and then they vote down a strike.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, that's also true. And okay, I think we talked about what some of the attacks on the theory look like, and Sam pointed that out pretty well, but here's what's important, right? Because Sam, you specifically brought up the issue, why do we need to read Marx and Engels? They're just old, dead white men. So we want to refute those criticisms in a principled fashion, but what we don't want to do is kind of take the opposite approach where we defend those criticisms unprinciply by, patriotic socialism, like, oh, well, actually, not only is it not wrong for, not only is it okay that Marx and Engels were white men and wrote it and we can do their theory. In fact, like, that's the best kind of people to get theory from, right? That's just one example, but, like, if someone criticizes Marx and Engels as being old, dead white men, what we don't want to do is start talking some white supremacist or some, patriarchal sexist talking points. We have to avoid those, because that's the basis of any kind of socialism, in my opinion, is getting rid of those prejudices. So, yeah, how do we do that? Especially because, and I think this is almost intentional with some people, they couch their criticisms of communism and they couch their criticisms of scientific socialism in the language of social justice. And they use a lot of buzzwords and all this other stuff. But how do we criticize that without ourselves falling into reaction?
So, repeat again?
So, like Sam, for example, said one of the common criticisms you hear is, we don't need to study Marxism because all those books were written by old, dead white men, right? How do we refute criticisms like that, especially when they adopt, something that sounds, I'll say, leftist in rhetoric, right? How do we criticize those kinds of, how do we respond to those criticisms without jumping into becoming reactionary in our response?
Well, there's like multiple YouTube channels that like provide like explanations of like concepts and things, and like within Capital, like the Marxist Project. I mean, you could tell them, hey, look, there's these videos that are explain these concepts in like a concise way that have like pictures on them, or you can explain to them that, like, because you said not like arguing and then not using reactionary like argument points. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't think that like anyone that's trying to like inform someone in good faith would go like become reactionary in like their response if they're actually like arguing like in good faith. I mean, me personally, but I mean, if someone maybe like someone could make them read like shorter audiobooks by certain like people like Karl Marx, Lenin, like they're smaller like pamphlets, like 20 minutes, like audiobooks like I have like on my channel. Or you could just tell them, explain to them what they outlined, why it is that they matter, by like explaining what it is that they wrote to them.
Mm-hmm.
And then saying
Yeah, that's true.
that you can go more into depth by actually researching this yourself. So you kind of you have to give people like the jump off point. Like you have to be the person that's going to, like, as like a socialist economist person, you have to introduce people to different people online that are able to concisely explain certain subjects.
Yeah.
Because those people, like, I think that everyone in this society is like especially deprived of like the knowledge that they need in order to understand, like, and be class conscious. So like you have to try and give them like things. You have to give them like material. Like not like physical material, but like sending them to the right places.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's all true. Does anyone else have a comment on this?
So there is a old Kwame Ture quote from the 70s, I think, 70s or 80s, where he says, people say that Marxism is Eurocentric and that it is a European ideology and that it can't help, well, in his situation, he was at a talk in Ghana, I think, or Guinea maybe, somewhere in West Africa. But he was giving a talk and he said that it can't help liberate African people. And he said that's not true. Marx didn't invent socialism, he discovered it. If you sat me down in a desert with nothing but knowledge of capitalism, I would come up with the same conclusions. So the point is to teach people. The introduction point is not to harp on Marx and Lenin and all these writers. So the quote's over, by the way. But the point is not to harp on all these Marx, Lenin, these writers that wrote the theory. Is to lay the groundwork, the basic groundwork, stuff you can easily see, like owners being opposed to the workers and etc. And you lay out those basics, and then from there, once people are interested, you go into, okay, well, we have a better explanation of this in Marx or in Stalin or whatever. And it's like the George Jackson quote that I don't remember who, but they brought it up earlier, that it's teaching people how to think instead of what to think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true, and it's also helpful to know, like Sam brought up, a lot of Marxists, like Marxism was invented in the 1800s, and it's now 2023, so we're going close to 150 years here, if not more than that, right, of Marxist history. And in that time, a lot of non-European people have, like you got Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam, fucking overthrew the United States, not only the U.S., but the French, using Marxism. Ho Chi Minh was a Marxist, and he wasn't white. You got Kim Il-sung, you got people in Africa, like in the Communist Party of Swaziland today. You got Frelimo in Mozambique. You got Thomas Sankara. You got Kwame Nkrumah. All kinds of, just everywhere. South America, every continent, right? Every group of people and stuff has their own, there's Marxists come from a diverse array of backgrounds, and I think to not even acknowledge that by the critics who bring up that line of attack, I think is very, very, very much short-sighted and just not true. And I think that's like Sam says, if anything, that just proves the validity of Marxism. If so many people from so many different cultures and backgrounds and stuff can all, obviously they don't just copy paste it, but like they can use its methods and use its way of thinking. To me, that proves the validity of it. That's how I see it. Okay, let's see. Okay, this is the last one. Alright, so the theory that consists in basing socialism on the moral notion of justice, on a struggle against the mode of distribution instead of the mode of production. The conception of class antagonism as an antagonism between the poor and the rich, the billionaires and the workers, the effort to graft the, quote, cooperative principle on capitalist economy already existed before him being Bernstein. And these theories were, in their time, in spite of their insufficiency, effective theories of the proletarian class struggle. They were the children's 7-league boots, thanks to which the proletariat learned to walk upon the scene of history. But after the development of the class struggle and its reflex in its social conditions that led to the abandonment of these theories and to the elaboration of the principles of scientific socialism, there could be no socialism outside of Marxist socialism, and there could be no socialist class struggle outside of the social democracy. That is why the return to pre-Marxist socialist theories no longer signifies today a return to the 7-league boots of the childhood of the proletariat, but a return to the puny, worn-out slippers of the bourgeoisie. So, yeah, I get to see people's thoughts on this.
What theoretical development have occurred since Luxemburg's time? How have they been tested, and what were the results?
Yeah, so like I guess what I took away from this was she's saying like all these ideas were new at one point in time, and back and then is justified because it was new. It's like Sam brought up, social experience and putting things into practice. There's no way they could have known that this would have happened, and that way it was scientific. They were doing an experiment in the laboratory of society, an experiment in scientific socialism. But we learned it doesn't work out, right? And so I think that's what she's trying to say here, why we can't just go back to that, because they already tried it out. It didn't work. We're scientists. We got to try something new. So that's what I was saying when I said what theoretical developments. I'm trying to say what new things have we tested since Luxemburg's time, and how did they work out?
Well, we pretty much tested everything, because she died in 1917, 18, sorry. So, I don't know.
I was thinking like in terms of trying to think. All right, between 2012 to 2020, many people dedicated their entire lives to trying to achieve socialism in America by the election of Bernie Sanders. And I don't mean, am I a Bernie fan? No, but when I say this, I legitimately don't mean it in like a disrespectful fashion to him or anyone else. I'm just simply stating a lot of people dedicated a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of effort into getting that man elected and trying to go that route. And how's that worked out, Like, I don't think it's worked out too well. And so, but there's still people who say, oh, we just got to try it a different way. Maybe it'll be different. And I think that's why I brought that up, is because it's like, look, we tried it out, man. And maybe in some countries it works, but not in the United States in 2023 it doesn't work. That's the main example I was thinking of.
Theoretical developments. I think that a lot of things have changed. Like I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the.
I'll be honest, I forgot what I was trying to get at when I wrote that question down. But
I think that the yeah, a lot has changed since then.
Yeah, definitely. Does anyone else have any comments about this or anything? I think this is the last slide.
Which question is this? First one.
Either of them really. I think I gotta start making my kids something to eat, so I was trying to wrap it up.
For the second question, I'd say anarchists.
Yeah, I can see that. How so?
So I would put it in parallel with peasants being oppressed and being subordinated to landlords and all these other forces, and they want to be free and run their own enterprises without being told what to do by other people. It's a sort of individualistic stance on this whole socialist thing.
Yeah, like living a lifestyle, kind of. Yes. Anyone else? Okay. Yeah, I think that about wraps up our presentation for... Oh, wait. Yeah, okay, yeah, that is the last slide. I'm going to go ahead and stop presenting then. Yeah, so basically that's it for the book and everything. I don't know what we're going to do next. I was thinking maybe, I already talked to Pius and Communist Party of Swaziland. He said they would love to have someone come here. I thought maybe 1 week while we're in between books, they can just come and talk about whatever they want to say.
Yeah, get them
That'd be nice. I'd love to have that.
Get them to come here, and then we can talk to them.
Yeah, Pedamilo, I can hash out the details how it would work technically with you, like in a one-on-one. But yeah, their internet connection down there, as well as just the power supply more generally, is not the most stable. So sometimes they call it load shedding, and it goes off, and it fucking. There's also the huge time zone difference, so I'm gonna have to work those details out. But yeah, they already told me they would love to come here, and it sounds like other people are interested in that. So I'm gonna try and work on getting it set up.
You're affiliated with them, so I mean you have like good contacts with them, right?
Yeah, I have all of them on WhatsApp, like as well as I have a group chat with the party. I talk to them quite often, so yeah.
Yeah, that would definitely be very good. And then, do you think we could upload that to the channel?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they would love to upload that.
Yeah.
The only thing is they would probably have to be on Zoom. I would be connected to them on Zoom, and then I would somehow find a way to pipe their audio into Discord. But I will look. I've done it before. I'll look into how to do that.
I think I could record on Zoom. I think.
Okay, yeah, we can get you in on the Zoom call, and you can record it too.
Yeah.
And when you are on Zoom, you don't need to record it on your computer. The app can record it for you.
Say again?
Okay.
Record on the...
Zoom can record the conversation for you.
Oh, yeah, yes it can. Yeah, we'll figure out the audio-visual details, though. I gotta go check on my kids, and I'm starving, and I gotta make them some food. So everyone have a good weekend and stuff. I'll fill everyone in with more details about that.
Yes, it was a good slide. Good
Thanks, everyone.
discussion.
Yeah.
See you guys.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Yeah.